here we are with Dr. Ryan Buccafurni, David Klemic here at the Klemic Performance Method Studio. We're at Bucc's Breakdowns. Let's put your thinking caps on for a second and let's learn a little bit. We have Ryan in the building today. We're going to talk about this subject that's a phenomenon that is overlooked a lot, but it is probably the main factor in why people can punch, kick, throw, swing, everything that you do with a ball involved pretty much comes from rotational force.
Sure.
That is just a phenomenon that I think is highly misunderstood, and people use the weight room and they use this and this and that, or they don't because they're afraid of it.
Sure.
Let's go into all of the minutia, the metadata of why. I mean, you nailed this before the show, and I love to just hear exactly what you said.
Yeah, so baseball in particular, but tennis, volleyball, there's rotational components to the sport, to throwing a baseball, to hitting a baseball. You need to be able to rotate well, you need to be able to rotate fast, you need to be able to rotate efficiently. From a pitching standpoint, your rotation stems off your back leg. So you need a strong, stable, sturdy back leg, foot screwed into the ground, and be able to rotate your pelvis to create elastic energy over that back leg and then shoot out of it as aggressively as you can. So you cannot rotate well if you don't have a good stable base under you, which is super duper important. So
kind of like something that you stick in the ground to twist.
100%.
If it's not stuck in the ground, it'll just spin
yep,
out,
you're leaking. And you're going to make up, if you're leaking, you're going to make up other ways, and you're going to, again, maybe pick up your arm speed or fly your shoulder open to try to get there because you're an athlete, but you're compensating and you're losing the ability to generate as much power and as much speed as possible. So that stable base is huge. Good ankle stability, good back leg hip stability, and then be able to really wind that pelvis back over that back leg, sustain it, and then shoot out. Right.
So now we talk about torque as the rotational equivalent of linear force. Right. You have a machine that can measure torque, right? And rotational force.
So that's cool. The Proteus allows us to train in 3D and then gives us data on how well we do rotate. So we can practice sitting on that back leg, holding that back leg, creating that tension and shooting out of it, and then making sure that like our speed measures are measuring what we're seeing in a throw, right? Because we want to mimic some of our lifts in the weight room to be as close to baseball as specific, not everything, right? But if we want to train speed, we want to make sure that our numbers are matching the numbers of a throw, or if we need to pick up, get quicker in our rotation, then we know how to train that way. Train lighter weights but faster versus training under heavy load.
What about how about like the sequence of the movement? You would start at just like you said, from the ground up.
Yep. So
everything sequences that same way. When you're loading everything, start from the ground, so the ankle, the knee, the depth of the going.
Again, same thing as you need good steady base on your foot. Then as you rotate over, you need your hip to stabilize your knee. Then you need enough hip mobility to allow the pelvis to actually rotate on that back leg to create the tension to be able to explode out of it.
And then how much is that leg that swings up and across and crosses the sagittal plane and transverse plane and swings across? How much is the leg?
I think that still stems. So in a perfect world, right? If you're a righty, you would want your left leg to start heading almost back towards the shortstop to create that pull. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of that is your ability to hold on to that tension and explode out of it from your back, actually your back leg and your pelvis, right? Your pelvis is going to spin you out of it more than you actually driving with your front leg. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
It's not like you don't want to be like pushy. Pushy would be jumping with your back leg, creating like a triple extension moment, and then trying to like muscle that front leg. We want to like create coil. So we're, again, creating tension, front leg going over back leg, and then that pelvis, bang, rotating out of it. To propel you down that way. Does that make sense?
Got it. And then how much does it help you to be like taller while throwing a baseball or swinging?
I think everything comes like back to physics, right? So if you're taller and you're moving well and you can create more elastic energy with longer lever arms, your potential to throw harder is probably higher, right? Just from a mathematical standpoint. With that said, a lot of tall guys don't move as efficiently for a ton of reasons than some of our smaller guys. So we find where I work with a lot of our hardest thrower are not 6'5" necessarily. Now there's some horses that are 6'5" that throw gas, but some of Chase Petty's maybe 6 foot, but his ability to sustain coil and generate force rotationally and speed rotationally.
That was my next question. Was how does a smaller guy make up for the lack of height? He has to do it
more coil, better. We say like there's things called wide ISAs and narrow ISAs. A narrow ISA is like a smaller rib cage, right? So more of a cylindrical body type, and they have the ability to actually create more of a rotational moment, kind of like a figure skater, and spin out of it, right? So they can create this elastic energy rotationally a lot better than a wider ISA. Somebody more like me that's broad this way, I can't coil as well. So I might be somebody, even from a training perspective, we might allow me to be a little jumpy or a little bit more extension based, because my body type can't get into those spots. So then maybe then we work the linear component a little more on somebody like me to create that linear projection, because I'm not set up to be a great rotator, right? And now we're really getting into some minutia of body types and how how you can actually, how you have to train every pitcher a little different, even based on body type sometimes. But so that, again, these are variables like that we try to consider based on everybody that comes in the door, right, needs a little bit different stuff to get them to throw harder.
That's fascinating. And before we get into the rest of this, we're going to go to our commercial with the Trazer right after this. And
the play testing has its limits, and I think the Trazer, and this gets me excited, is that if we can hook them up to a Trazer, we can have true objective data even better than what we're doing now. And that's why the return to play testing, it's still evolving, it's progressing, it needs to continue to evolve because we're not perfect at it. But something like the Trazer, like that's kind of game changing for me.
We're back. That was our sponsor, the Trazer, which is one of the neater phenomenons that we're getting to know really well right now, and we appreciate them because they saw the value in us measuring and our metrics that we use measuring wise, and for all of our athletes, and the more we learn about it, the better we're going to get at this. So special thanks to the Trazer and Barry French. So anyway, the next subject we're going to go into is kind of how we take in an athlete, which is like through a IDS score. It's called an initial displacement score. That has to do with your vertical leap, your broad jump, and your lateral bound. It's interesting to hear that all the baseball teams come in, they test somebody on the force plate on the vertical leap right away.
That's one of the first measures they do. I think those three basic measures is like that's off the cuff. Then they'll start getting into more rotation.
Right.
So it's a base for.
They're easier to measure. The lateral bound and broad jump are very easy to measure, and then the vertical leap is the tougher thing. You use a force plate or a just jump. We use the just jump system here. We also have the Trazer does vertical leap testing as well. It's not a force plate, but it measures on an actual measurement on a screen. All of that, once we see an increase in an athlete's IDS score, it's like imagine your catch radius. You throw a ball out there in baseball, and you can catch anything within your radius. If you can catch 100% of anything within that IDS, the only way to catch better is to increase the IDS, right? So we look at that, and we started to think, how could this help the pitchers? And how does this help anybody that swings, or what would that work? So maybe fill us in on like how that helps you as a trainer.
Well, I think it gives you their baseline power output potential, right? Their baseline athleticism, right? But I guess the one part that's missing from that is that true rotational test, because you're looking sagittal plane, you're looking frontal plane, a lateral bound. We're not getting anything to give you like that true the true transverse plane, right? And again, that's where I think the Proteus comes in, fills a gap there.
Yeah.
But if you're hitting all those other metrics and you're seeing your velocity go up, and it's again showing that you can produce force in all planes of motion, we should hopefully then see a correlation in velocity, exit velocity.
We usually see it like defensively. We're like, okay, so your first motion to get away, you have to push off your right leg to go left, and grab a ball left, and opposite on the other way, and then you have to kind of reach across. But we see this with athletes. If they displace themselves better laterally, they can they can displace themselves better when you're moving forward to carve a route, to turn the base path or whatever you need to do. That helps dramatically. So when we see like increases, that's also a jump increase, because you need to produce force down and then abduct away. So it has to happen, or you have to figure out how to rotate your body to swing that leg to get further. So either way, they have to figure out some kind of skill and then add power to that, just like any pitch.
Sure.
So I think it does help. We were just talking about that. We should try to come up with the joint study on how the increase of IDS can actually just help the pitch speed. What we do is want to talk about how the rotation of the body actually ends in the arm, and the arm is just kind of like a whip, right?
Yep, comes for the ride in essence. At least that's what again, and there's kind of debate in that, right? But the way I look at it is we want to be so energy efficient in our lower half and through our core that the arm's just making up for that last little piece. So it's again, from an assessment standpoint, the biggest thing I look at, one of the first things I look at is back leg, hip, internal rotation. Your ability to have adequate internal rotation in that back leg is going to allow that pelvis to kind of hover back and rotate around it to create that initial tension, right? And then we look up. Internal rotation is kind of like important for back leg rotation capability, block leg, because as soon as you front leg blocks, your pelvis then has to rotate again downhill. So if you don't have enough IR on that front leg, your pelvis will leak open, or you'll externally rotate and you'll leak energy laterally. So if you have enough hip IR, when you block when your lead leg blocks, your pelvis then spins that way back down through the mound.
Wow.
And those are so IR. I feel like most of my day is trying to improve hip internal rotation by improving pelvic position, and that's like an unlock from a lot of things, right? That's a lot of things that's going to take the pressure then off your arm, because all the elastic energy is coming from the lower half, arm's coming for a ride. Now we still want aggressive, fast arm action, but we say like you don't want to muscle your upper body. You want to create all that tension from that lower half and let that arm come through, kind of like from a reflex standpoint, but then we want like a lot of eccentric strength to like control the ball coming out of the hand.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
That's fascinating, because we were talking about like elastic energy and how important that is, and that's something that we work with our athletes is making them elastic and more responsive to the ground. So like an Achilles tendon is made up of collagen, right? So we have to do collagen exercises to densify collagen and put it through collagen synthesis, just like when we're breaking down muscle tissue, so it goes through muscle protein synthesis. What tendons and ligaments and what are the different things that we can make elastic to make the whipping action better and bounce back?
From an upper body, the big thing is like pec. We always talk about pec stretch. So when you get sitting on that back leg, you're bringing your arm into full horizontal abduction. We want that pec to be on full stretch, and then bang, reflex jam out of it, right? And a lot of times what we'll see is throwers, from throwing a lot of baseballs over time, is their pecs end up getting like fibrotic and get tight. So they're throwing. Over time, the eccentric stress from the pec starts tightening up, and they start getting here, right? Mm-hmm. So now their throw that got them in a good position, now starting to work against them. This is where arm care and assessment is so important. So the thing that gave them the gift, getting into a big pec stretch, getting out of it aggressively, throwing gas from an upper body, now it's taking a toll on their pec, and now the rib cage position is changing.
Wow.
Now they're getting a pushier arm action because they're sitting here.
Right.
Their starting position's bad. Their true abduction's limited.
Right.
Their pec length is limited. Rib cage is limited. They've got a pushier throw.
So then you're seeing the drop in
velo
velocity.
Drop. Usually it's a velo drop before pain, but that velo drop is telling us something's up. Their throw's getting a little pushy. And then we can start bringing it back to the back leg. Was it because they're not getting good back leg internal rotation, so they're flying open a little front, and then right? So it all it's like an ongoing assessment. But simplistically speaking, pec mobility, right rib cage. If you're a righty, mobility's super duper important.
I'm come to think of it, I'm picturing a few guys right now who I know are pitchers or whatever, and they look exactly like that. It's like, it's fascinating. I was talking to Tommy Green on ESPN radio like last 2 weeks ago, and he was saying the same thing about how that his one was pec would get really, really tight. This is before they knew about all the stuff that you're talking about. Guy pitched a no-hitter back in the 80s for the Phillies, and he was awesome. But he would say the same thing. My pec got so tight, it's still, my posture's really weird on the one side.
Yep.
And our last show, we talked about an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, and then how these type of things are very avoidable if you work it. What about working like bilateral symmetry? Like, what about the other side of the body? I know that's a phenomenon that we talk about, working the weaker side of your body. Can you do that with the Proteus?
Absolutely, and a lot of times, like in season, because they're rotating so aggressively. Again, a righty's rotating this way so aggressively. When we're training in season, we're doing everything opposite. So we're like filling the bucket back because, again, you play a sport and you develop a skill and you do something over and over and over and you create adaptations and imbalances to make you good at the sport. Absolutely. But if you keep going and don't put money back in the bank, don't start to balance yourself back out, those adaptations become too far down the chain and start working against you. And that's the analogy I'm saying with the pec. We see that with hip mobility. We see that with thoracic rotation. Well, they're only be able to rotate that way, so we'll start training them.
Right. This is a simple way to put it, too.
Balance.
Simple way to put it, we tell our athletes is, if you look at an iceberg, you're looking at what's above the water is the equivalent to what's below the water.
Yeah.
So you can't have more above than you have below. It's got to balance out.
For sure.
So the deeper the higher you want to see something peak from the iceberg, it has to have that underneath it to balance it out. So if it had less, you're taking less off the top. So we just talked about that yesterday, is doing things in opposite sequence so that your concentric movements are now your eccentric movements, and then they can build a bigger base.
Absolutely.
So you can move forward. So that's another crazy phenomenon. We got into some cool stuff right now. We're going to go to our second Trazer commercial, and we'll be back with Dr. Ryan Buccafurni.
Learn to play testing has its limits, and I think the Trazer, and gets me excited, is that if we can hook them up to a Trazer, we can have true objective data even better than what we're doing now. And that's why the return to play testing, it's still evolving, it's progressing, it needs to continue to evolve because we're not perfect at it. But something like the Trazer, that's kind of game changing for that.
All right, so we're back. That was our Trazer commercial. We appreciate them so much for believing in us and what we do, and we'll be able to grow together. So we're back with Dr. Ryan Buccafurni, and we're going to finish up today talking some pretty profound aspects of training and how you can actually ruin your arm.
Yeah, sure.
The 3 ways you can ruin your arm. I love this. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this. The 3 biggest mistakes we see is obviously overuse young. Like you see the 11-year-old that's playing 150 games, that's insane. That they get adaptations that happen way too early, and they're kind of setting themselves up for an issue, right? Little league shoulder, little league elbow. We see that too much. The second one, though, and I think is what we're seeing more so, especially in our college athletes and even pros, is underdevelopment or what's the word I'm looking for? Underpreparedness. I'm sorry. Yeah, is the fact that they did not build their arm up in the off season enough. So they didn't follow a stringent throwing program. They didn't follow a stringent arm care and lifting program. So then they come to spring training or their February 15th and they're going out. Now we're trying to make a team. So they're going all out effort, but their arm capacity is not ready for it. So underpreparedness is huge. Most of the injuries in the major leagues that happen, shoulder and elbow injuries, happen in the first 2 months of the season. And to me, that's not an overuse thing, right? That's an underpreparedness thing. So in the youth, we're seeing overuse. I think we're still trying to navigate the college and pro players of finding that balance of not over abusing them, but they can't be underprepared either. That's just as dangerous, if not worse, in a lot of times. And then the third thing is, I think, not having a team. If you're taking pitching seriously and you want to play at the next level, you have to have an expert around you, and you need a good pitching coach. I'm a physical therapist. I'm not a pitching coach. I know a little bit about the throw, but I punt to my pitching coaches all the time, and the pitching coaches are going to help with your throwing programs and make sure you're building up load appropriately. A good physical therapist to keep you on an arm care program and make sure that your mobility is doing what it's supposed to do. You're not having strength deficits. You're moving how you should move. A good strength and conditioning and speed coach, because that kind of fills all the other gaps now to make sure that we're staying strong, we're staying explosive, we're staying fast. Our lifting isn't slowing us down, and that, again, it's important to have the dynamic of a performance coach and a strength coach talking. But I think a team is huge because there's so many factors that go into potential breakdown, and we got to be working together. And I think that's, if you're going to take it serious, those are the 3 things as far as taking care of your arms that you have to accept and own those 3 things to make sure not one of those is going to come back and bite you.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. And also, I wanted to nail down this, because this has been one of those things that baseball players are really, really scared of the weight room.
Yeah.
Why are they scared of the weight room? And then how do you use the weight room in order to combat that? Sure.
So I think we're honestly seeing a huge shift in that. Now a lot of our baseball players, if you come in BPC 10 to 12 on pro, when the pros are there, they look like football players. I think generally speaking, again, that paradigm is shifting into, they know we have to build strong, robust athletes. I think even to some extent, though, I think it's getting shifted too much that way, that we're turning into meatheads that in some cases we have to make sure that we're still filling the gaps of making sure we're not losing athleticism. And I do think that can happen. I think it's like, whereas again, getting too compressed from lifting in weights that aren't necessarily helping your sport can then actually decrease your mobility. So again, working with a strength coach to understand the demands of the sport is huge. But I think the shift of like the weights is starting to, they understand we have to be strong, we have to be resilient. And even like we have a bunch of 6th to 8th graders now, and their parents seeing like getting them into gyms important, and we have a bunch of signups of that. So I think I think that is a positive thing that's happened versus like in the 90s before the steroid era, when nobody would go to the gym.
Like, and the way that you use the weight room is another thing.
That's huge.
Like we say you're not going to get a ton out of your performances from using a slow moving weight, because their neuromuscular movements are slow, and then you're teaching slow movements. We want to teach fast movements through full ranges of motion. So really the way that you use it is not, you can't be a bodybuilder.
Right.
You cannot be a bodybuilder in the weight room and expect to have results that are athletic.
Yep.
And as a matter of fact, even the way that athletes are built, as you see, it's almost everything behind you pushes you forward. Almost all sports move forward.
Yeah.
Anything in front of you pushes you backwards, and then that's where bodybuilders are built. They're built, and they look good in front of the mirror.
Yeah. But they move,
and we say the show muscles versus the go muscles, and the go muscles are behind you. As a matter of fact, I used to work out all the time with Brian Urlacher, and he's a guy that looked not as impressive, maybe like a basketball player in front, and you from behind, huge traps, huge back, huge butt, hamstring, gastroc, look like Arnold Schwarzenegger from the back. From the front, like a basketball player, normal, super athletic. So and then that's how everyone's built for the go. And if you build that up and not build up the muscles to be slow, the hypertrophy that makes it like a slow movement or the slow speed of slow moving weights, you really don't. You're not changing anything. You're not adapting to a fast moving sport.
And you might actually be hindering yourself. Like that's what we see.
It's cool, but so then your program, your weights program, nails that. And so like. What are some of the way that you use the weights, even like the bar and stuff like that? How do you use that?
So we're teaching, like the young guys, we're teaching like your fundamental movement patterns, hinge patterns, lunge patterns, squats, pushing, pulling, and then so we're teaching a basic fundamental of that. We're also getting them introduced to doing rotational activities like med ball throws, getting them used to sitting on their back leg, getting used to being explosive through rotation. So we're building, at the young group, we're building a foundational functional strength, right, and then progressively loading, because I think that's the group that like tends to need some more traditional, put some meat, like tighten up type of stuff. But we're still making sure that we're incorporating the explosive, fast, twitchy, rotational stuff so they don't get too bound down and then start losing their ability to move.
And
so it's a balance.
And one of the things that we trust our athletes is we don't have a weight room or anything. So we use you guys, to cover that for us. Because nothing I would trust more than having you oversee that programming, and therefore you're going to get a great education out of it, as well as the work from it, because that's a neat thing going into the future. And if you're looking at your 6th to 8th grader, really looking at the weight room, it's going to be intimidating. Every exercise is going to be intimidating. You're going to have a volunteer coach, or maybe a guy on a stipend that's going to be just running on the treadmill while everybody else is working out. 100 kids walking around with a piece of paper and nobody knows what to do. So this is a really good way, and I'm so glad you filled the gap. It really helps our athletes, and we know that we're going to be cohesive and we're going to be able to work together. So,
absolutely.
Another great one with Dr. Ryan Buccafurni. Thanks for coming on and doing your thing. This is Bucc's Breakdowns. We're at Klemic Performance Method. We'll see you next time.